Finishing. We have now come to that part of binding where much is left to the taste of the workman. The various patterns which have been invented from time to time are almost innumerable, and on the judicious use of these entirely depends the external beauty of the book. In this branch of binding it is requisite, in the first place, to wash the cover over with size or glue water. Footnote. Some use paste and water mixed together to about the consistency of thick milk. If size or glue water be used for common calf, it should be rather stronger, and for Russia, stronger still. End footnote. This is used to prevent the glare from sinking into the covers. In applying it, the boards should be held in the left hand, with the covers extended over the thumb and fingers. A sponge must then be dipped in the size water, and the entire cover slightly rubbed over with it. The book is now to be placed end uppermost, until dry, or sideways on the edge of a table, or something similar, allowing one board to hang down. Care must be taken not to rub the size water on the side papers of half-bound books, but it must be applied to the leather at the corners. When the cover is dry, the back must be prepared for filleting by marking the bands. The back is first to be divided with a pair of compasses into 3, 4, or 5 parts, according to fancy, and the line of these divisions should fall, as near as possible, on the bands, allowing more space next the foot. The divisions being thus equally taken, a folding stick is to be rubbed across the back, to make a more sure guide for the fillet. A line must also be made with it near the head, and generally 2 at the foot. If it be intended to put on a lettering piece, which is not required for fancy-coloured leathers, it should now be done. This must be pared so thin as scarcely to be perceptible on the back, and cut so as to fit in exactly between the second and third bands from the head. The covers are now ready for glaring. Footnote. Glare can be bought ready prepared in London at the shops of nearly all the vendors of millboard, at 1 shilling 3 pence per quart. But, as it may not always be convenient to procure this, we will give directions for preparing it for immediate use on a small scale. Make a hole in the shell of an egg, and let the glare run into a cup. Cut the end of a quill into cross slits about 1 inch in length, and bend the slip pieces out horizontally. Place these in the glare, and work backwards and forwards the feather part of the quill between the palms of the hands. This will produce a froth, the whole of which, after standing a few hours, must be skimmed off, when it may be considered as fit for use. A little salt thrown into it tends to preserve and clear it. All books, whether gilt or otherwise, must be glared, but the paper covering the sides of half-bound books should be sized. End footnote. It may here be observed that it is always essential to keep good glare, otherwise it will be impossible to give the gold a proper lustre. The glare is to be rubbed over the entire cover in the same way as the paste water, and must thoroughly dry before each fresh application. Morocco and roan only require but once glaring, sheep twice, and, if the paste water has been used, calf 3 times. But if the cover has been sized, twice will be sufficient. Russia leather, previous to finishing, should be washed over once with serum of bullock's blood, which will give it a gloss and prepare it better for the next process, that of filleting. Several books of the same dimensions, if the backs be tolerably flat, as is usually the case with school books, may be filleted at the same time. A piece of wood, commonly called a filleting board, or T, should be screwed tight in the cutting press. It must fall below the level of the backs of the books, which should be ranged side by side against it, care being taken to place them exactly even one with the other. The cushion being now in readiness, a leaf of the book containing the gold must be gently opened at the end, where it must be lightly struck with the knife. Footnote: handling the gold requires considerable care. The least air, or even slightly breathing on it, will frequently prove the loss of the entire leaf. End footnote. This will produce sufficient air to raise the gold, so as to admit the knife under it, by which it should be carefully conveyed to the cushion. It must next be cut into pieces, a little longer and wider than the face of the fillet, or roll, intended for covering the bands. The fillet is now to be put to the fire, until it has received a moderate heat. Footnote: all tools used for finishing must be previously heated, but new ones require a greater heat than those which have been a considerable time in use. Practice is the only sure guide. Some idea, however, may be formed of the correct heat by applying to the tool a piece of damp sponge, when, if it produces a slight hissing sound, it will, in most instances, be found a tolerably fair criterion. End footnote. The face of the fillet must then be rubbed with an oiled rag, and rolled over each separate strip of gold, until covered. Holding the fillet in the right hand, and the left on the books, the fillet should be firmly pressed over the marked bands, till the whole are filleted, after which, if it is not to be lettered, the impressions should be cleared with a piece of flannel. Lettering. On preparing the leather for the gold, it is first necessary to enclose some tallow in a piece of linen rag, which should be rubbed over the lettering piece until slightly greased. Footnote: some finishers use palm oil, which perhaps is better. This also should be enclosed in a linen rag and kept in a cool place. Others use sweet oil. End footnote. For if too much be rubbed on, it will materially affect the brilliancy of the gold. A leaf of the gold must now be conveyed to the cushion, and a sufficient portion cut from it to cover the lettering piece, on which it must be placed by a piece of cotton wool, which will cause the gold to adhere to it by first rubbing it on the cheek. With the same piece of wool, the gold must afterwards be slightly pressed, to bind it more firmly to the leather. The book must now be put in the laying press, with the head more elevated than the foot. The brass letters must then be moderately heated, either in sand or before the fire, and each rubbed, before lettering, on a piece of rough calf. Footnote: metal types are an excellent substitute for these, but in lettering with them, the entire word must be adjusted in a stamping frame, it being nearly impossible to use them separately. More expedition is also necessary, as metal will not retain the requisite heat near so long as brass. Some heat metal types in boiling water, But this is objectionable, inasmuch as there will always be a partial steam arise from the letters thus heated, which is likely to deaden the gold. Heating them before the fire is preferable, taking care not to put them too close, or they are likely to melt. End footnote. They should then be lightly pressed on the lettering piece, one after the other, ranging them perfectly straight. But this requires some little practice. The best guide for beginners is to mark a straight line where the letters are to fall, previously to putting on the gold, which is now to be rubbed off as before mentioned. Gilt back. The backs of such books as are intended to be ornamented with various tools are usually entirely covered with gold. Footnote. During hot weather it will be advisable not to cover more than about 12 volumes at one time, and in very cold weather not more than 8. When in mild weather 20 may be covered before finishing. End footnote. This must be cut in strips the width of the back, and placed on in the same way as for lettering, joining one piece to another until the back be covered. The book must now be put in the laying press, nearly level with the back, perfectly even, and screwed moderately tight. The fillet is then to be put over the bands, on either side of which any light palette may be used. Any tool emblematic of the subject, or that best accords with the dimensions of the back, is next to be used, beginning at the head of the book and making each impression, if only one tool be used, centrical between the bands. The tool must bear equally every way. By working it a little backward and forward, and to the right and left, the tool must not be too long dwelt upon, and the larger it is, the heavier must be the impression, bearing scarcely at all on extremely small ones. The book is then to be lettered, and the gold to be rubbed off, as previously stated. Polishing. The book having been gilt in the preceding way is now to be polished. Footnote. The polishing iron must not be used on grained leathers. Instead of this, they must be rubbed well with a piece of rough calf. End footnote. On every portion of the leather and the side papers of half-bound books, the polishing iron must be applied. It is first to be heated and cleared on rough calf, but care must be taken that it be not too hot, or it will turn the glaire white and deface the marbling. Before applying the iron, the cover should be rubbed over with a clean oil rag, when the edges are first to be polished, then the backs, and lastly the sides or boards, passing the iron quickly over the whole, and not allowing it in the least to rest on any part of the leather or paper. The book being brought to a good polish is now ready, if it suit the taste of the binder, for blind tooling. This makes a pretty contrast to the gold, and should not be done until the book is polished. Otherwise, the polishing iron will, in some degree, counteract the intended effect. The tools must be heated, cleared on rough calf, and applied in the same way, as if intended for using on the gold. The next thing to be done is burnishing the edges. The book, or books, must be placed between boards and screwed tight in the cutting press. Then with a dog's tooth, or agate, the foredge, and head and tail, must be briskly rubbed backwards and forwards, until brought to a fine polish, after which are to be pasted down the end papers. For extra books, and particularly such as have coloured or marbled linings, considerable neatness is required in pasting them down. Each board should be thrown back, and the paper worked in perfectly smooth and even at the joints of the boards. The paper should be allowed to dry with the boards thrown back, or the joint will never be well formed. A bad joint will, on reopening the boards, after closing them, partly draw back the leaves of the book with them, and this will always be the case, unless the above directions be attended to. The next thing to be considered is tapping down the corners. There is usually a roughness left on the inner side of each corner of the boards, partly produced by turning the leather in, and partly by the polishing iron passing along the edges. This is to be remedied by tapping them down with the backing hammer, which, however, must be used very gently, or, in lieu of this, polished plates of tin are to be placed between the linings, and the same outside, as far back as the joints of the boards, or graining boards are to be used, as the case may require, and the books to be screwed tight in the standing press, when, after remaining a proper time, and being taken out, the cover should be rubbed over with a piece of rough calf, which will greatly add to its beauty. The book may now be considered as entirely finished.